In this video we're going to take a look at the graduated filter, and the image I'm going to use is this one here. Now at first glance it doesn't exactly leap off the screen to us, does it? So perhaps we can show two things here, not only the graduated filter operation, but also that we have to be a bit careful at times when we're evaluating pictures as thumbnails, because as long as all the raw ingredients are there, when we open these up in the develop module, we can use the options we have, including the graduated filter, to tease out the quality in the image. Now I'm sure you know where I'm going to go here. Shift and Tab to remove all of those panels, and F8 to bring back the one on the right. Where I'm going to start with this is chromatic aberration. So quick visit to lens corrections. I'm going to go to the basic and just remove chromatic aberration. That's all I want, because there's certain to be some up in this area. Now I'm going to go back to my basics because I'm going to add a few improvements. Well, that's the plan anyway, to this image. I'm going to start by adding a healthy slug of clarity into this, and look what it's going to do to the foreground. It really makes it come alive, doesn't it? How much we choose, a little bit of personal choice, but I think there's no problem here, even if we took all that this clarity slider can give us. I'm also going to add a bit of vibrance because there were some lovely greens coming through here. I'm going to pull that up a little bit, but we've got the same problem we normally have, that we're overdoing the blues. Well, we know how to deal with that. If we go down to our hue, saturation and luminance slider, I can just drop the blues down a little bit just to temper those so they're not too bad. If we come back here, I'm looking at the histogram, and we do have a little other stacking up on the right hand side, but of course we're bound to have that when we look at the top of the image, which we hopefully can do something about with the graduated filter in a moment. Now whether we add any contrast, again I think personal choices these, but other than that I think I'm reasonably happy. So what I'm going to do for the moment is just close the basic tab down and select my graduated filter. Now when we see what appears, you can see why this and the radial and the adjustment brush are all sort of linked by the sort of settings that we can change. And the one setting we've not looked at in both the radial and the brush is this one here, so we must look at that before we leave this video. The graduated filter works much the same as those other two filters, because we can firstly add as many as we want, and we can adjust or edit the picture independently in each of those graduated filters. So we can add a filter at the top, filter at the bottom, and adjust them independently. We can have as many as we wish. They have the same pin which turn them on and off. But let's go to the top of the screen here, and you can see a little cross there. I'm going to click and drag. Now we can see those better in the sky, so I'll stop at that point for the moment. You can see first of all that this is a linear graduated filter, so I can turn it one way or another. But if I want it to be absolutely straight, if I touch the shift key, it snaps into position. If I'm too far around, I'm not sure it's going to do that. Still does it. That's pretty useful. So if you're trying to drag this down and it's wandering a little bit, just touch the shift key, and as you can see, it stabilizes that drag process. So what are we looking at there? Why don't I go down to the color option here and show you that, at the same time demonstrate what that graduated filter is doing, because it may actually do the job for us. I'm going to click this little tiny icon and a color panel appears, and it's pointing at that panel, so it's saying choose a color. Now I don't think it matters too much, so I'll choose something pretty bold, and there we have a nice bright orange. What I'm doing here, or what I'm able to do here then, is to apply a graduated filter starting with orange. Let's shut that down there, and the orange will remain. So if I go to my exposure, Now I think everybody knows what a graduated filter looks like. It starts solid at the top and it gradually works through to being transparent. Because we've got these three lines, what we can do here is we can drag these lines up. So the tighter the lines are, of course, the tighter the graduated effect is. If I drag that right down to the bottom, for example, then the graduated effect is much more delicate, although I did put in quite a bit of exposure there, and you can see it has more of an effect when we get onto pixels down here than it does on the light tones there. So we can add as many as we wish. We can decide on the type of gradient that we want, but typically on this sort of thing I would be dragging it down to somewhere like there, because I want as much change as I can get in the sky here, and I want it tapering off over this point between the center line and the bottom line. So let's double click the exposure and go back to my color and remove that, and we'll take a look at adding another change. Just like the radial filter and also the adjustment brush, we can hit the H key to hide the lines on screen if we wish. Let's have a look at the exposure here. I'm going to click and drag it down. And look at the effect that has on the image. If we go down and turn the effect of this on and off, you can see how the light coming through behind those trees is making them quite weak, but as soon as we adjust the exposure using our graduated filter, it all becomes far stronger. Now it even has, let's have a look, I think it's having an impact on the water in the middle. See how it's having an impact there. But of course, it's once we've got the colour or the exposure adjusted that we can then go back to our gradient and we can actually drag it down or up, and we get to see the effect it's putting into the image. So we can choose where it needs to be to get the best effect. I think we've probably had it about right, to be honest. Let's hit the H key again just for a moment. Now we've dropped that exposure down, let's take another look at that colour for a minute. Let's pick a blue. Let's pick something up there. And we see the instant result at the top there. So if it doesn't look natural, you can always move along a little bit. Move the other way. That looks a little bit better. So we've got those choices here. Or we could add more warmth to the sky if we felt it was appropriate. I mean, we've got more colours here than we can really know what to do with. But if we're trying to have some realism here, I think they've got to be in the oranges or a little bit of blue. Let's take it off on this occasion and shut that down, because we do have another opportunity. We can adjust just the temperature, of course. If we wanted to cool things a little bit, we can do so just by dragging that down. So we can cool down the tones in the sky if we wish, or not, as the case may be. All personal choices, of course. It's while we're making these changes that we need to be guided by what we see, and allowing for the personal choices we're all going to make. I'm looking at this picture and I'm thinking, well, perhaps the foreground needs to have a warmer look to that. Well, of course, all we've got to do here is click Done to that graduated filter. No problem, we can come back to it in a moment. I could go to my Basic tab and I could decide to just warm up the image. And when I just warm up that foreground a little bit, and I am warming up the sky as well, but when let me double click that and set it back. If I warm up that a little bit to the right, I think the balance is just that little bit nicer. If we look at the top right of this image, we can see there's a greater density in the top right sky than the top left. Small point, but maybe something we can do something about using another graduated filter. So let's tuck the Basic tab away once again, open up our graduated filter, and what I'm going to do here is to click and drag. I want to drag something down at an angle, something like that. Then I can look at my exposure again and just drag that down to give us a little bit of a balance, maybe a little tweak of the temperature to try to balance that a little bit more with the right hand side. Now this is one of those occasions when perhaps putting the cursor in the box and using the up and down arrow keys is a little bit better, because we can just get it to the right density. It's a small point, but many of the changes that we make in our image editing are small steps which add up to become bigger steps. I'm going to click New here, because I'm going to actually put another one on the bottom. And as we drag that up, I'll hit the Shift key to keep that nice and level. And what I'm going to do here is drop the exposure down so that we hold the image interest right into the center. Well, here you can see I've removed the remaining panel on the right and turned the lights out with the L key. Gives us the opportunity to look at the image as big as we can get it on screen. And when we look at a virtual copy, which I've just produced, we can see a massive difference which the graduated filter has helped us to produce. And I think the other thing evident with this image, and I've mentioned this before, is how quite often sharpness is a perception. There's no difference between these two in physical sharpness in relation to changes in the software, but this image looks distinctly sharper than the one we started with, and the sole reason for that is we have the contrast and tonal range about right. One of the greatest benefits of working in Lightroom, and I know I've said this before, is the ability for us to go back to the history and change things that we've done. But more than that, we can park our image once we've done some work on it and forget all about it for a little while. Because when we're in full creative flow, sometimes we don't always make our best judgments. If we can come back a few days later and look at an image and be able to say, no, I didn't get that quite right, and I can open this straight back up into the Develop module and make a few small tweaks, I think that is one of the most underestimated benefits that Lightroom offers.